after the webinar. Webinar certificates of attendance will be automatically emailed to you within 3 weeks if you have participated for the complete 60-minute webinar. With all that being said, I will turn it over to Dr. Berninger.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the webinar. I want to thank Tina Eichstadt, Senior Product Manager at Pearson, for inviting the webinar, Gannett Hagos, Marketing Pearson, for advertising the webinar, and Sherry Locken at Pearson for IT support in hosting the webinar. The PowerPoint was prepared as a handout, and you have heard how you can access that handout. And I encourage you to do it because the handout provides detailed information, and I'm not going to have time to permit discussing all that information during the webinar, but I want to call your attention to it and hope you can review what I can't cover after the webinar. And I look forward to a question and answer session at the end of the webinar hosted by Tina Eichstadt. My background in teaching in public schools at the elementary and secondary levels and at the university level, my PhD in psychology from Johns Hopkins University, my training and experience in clinical psychology with specialization in assessment and consultation and in research for over 25 years has informed the development of PAL products. Research supported by 25 years of grant funding from NIH and the many contributions of multidisciplinary teams, research participants, and educational professionals at research sites contributed to the research studies on which the PAL instructional and assessment tools are based. A grant from the U.S. Department of Education supported the initial math research that informed, in part, development of the PAL-2 math. PAL-2M. After explaining the early history of PAL products, I will discuss the recently revised PAL instructional tools and PAL-2 reading, writing, and PAL-2 math user guides, and then applications during the post-virtual education era after the pandemic. Transition to history of PAL products. Aurelio Prefetera, who was president and CEO of the Psychological Corporation, invited me to present my research on assessment and instruction. When I finished, he proposed developing assessment and instructional tools based on the research and naming them PAL for process assessment of the learner. Subsequently, these 3 instructional tools were published in 1998, and 2 tests were published in 2001. An additional instructional tool of 15 lesson sets, each based on a different research study, was co-authored with Sylvia Abbott, a teacher and school psychologist on the research team, and published in 2003. And the second edition of the reading and writing test and the second edition of the math test were published in 2007. In 2015, Pearson, which had acquired the Psychological Corporation, invited revisions based on our ongoing research of each of the 4 instructional products and of the user guide for PAL-2 reading and writing and the user guide for PAL-2 math. The revisions were copyrighted in 2020, but the final published products were based on both published research articles and research findings in press or not yet submitted that were later published. Transition to the 4 revised PAL instructional tools plus the reproducible instructional materials that go with the revised reading and writing lessons. Okay, the first instructional tool, PAL Revised Guides for Intervention, Reading, and Writing, is an instructional tool for educating the professionals who provide the assessment and instruction. It can be used for in-service professional development of all members of a multidisciplinary team and for a pre-service textbook at the college level. Part 1 is an overview of research on evidence-based reading and writing instruction, the history of assessment intervention links, an explanation of why it is important and how to assess and teach across levels of language, subword to word, to sentence, to text, close in time to create functional reading systems and functional writing systems. Part 2 has 6 steps for designing and implementing intervention plans. Number 1, identify necessary curriculum components. Number 2, link assessment and instruction. 3, write the intervention plan. 4, include parents, teachers, and students in the intervention. 5, monitor progress. And 6, applying concepts and research-based knowledge to practice through study of individual cases. Part 3 has research-supported instructional activities for orthographic awareness training at 3 units of analysis and phonological awareness training at 4 units of analysis. Many of the other PAL instructional materials draw on those instructional activities. There's also a list of norm tests for linking assessment to instruction, monitoring progress, and supplementing annual tests used by states and districts. Okay, I'm having trouble getting the slides to advance. Okay, now, sorry about that. The PAL Revised Handwriting Lessons, a program for handwriting, legibility, and automaticity. This is based on this published research article. That article was based on several preliminary studies that compared alternative ways to teach letter production. Subsequently, the method for teaching handwriting was used effectively in other multi-level writing interventions. There are 24 lessons in which each lowercase letter is practiced once in a different order across lessons on worksheet for each lesson that can be copied by individual students. Students use pencil without eraser but can cross out and revise. Worksheets are provided in both ball and stick and slanted format. Teacher can choose which to use. Lessons can be used with a group or individual students. Worksheets have the model letters for each alphabet letter with numbered arrow cues for student to study component strokes indicated with arrows and order in which to make them indicated by numbers. Worksheet has bold footer line and bold header line with dotted lines in between and space below footer line, so students learn the relative sizing of strokes and placement of strokes in space. Both help with learning to write legible letters differentiated from each of the other letters of the alphabet. Worksheets are also provided with a 1 or 2 word topic for a student to compose about in each lesson. The teacher gives the following instructions for each of 26 letters. Practice once in a lesson. At each step, the teacher names the letter because research showed naming letters facilitates letter retrieval, important for developing automaticity of letter writing. And the teacher can tell the student, when I name the letter, you can say the name quietly to yourself. Step 1. Study the numbered arrow cues in name letter. The arrows tell you the strokes to make, and the numbers tell you the order in which to make them. Step 2. Now use the 3x5 card to cover name letter, and then close your eyes and see name letter in your mind's eye. Step 3. Now open your eyes, write name letter, take the 3x5 card off model letter, and compare what you wrote with the model letter, name letter. Step 4. If what you wrote does not look like the model letter, then rewrite name letter on the lines and spaces in the same row so that your name letter looks just like the model letter, name letter. After each of 26 letters is practiced with these 4 steps, students compose for 5 minutes using the worksheet with the topic and lines to write on. After composing, the student orally reads composition to writing buddy, group of classmates, or tutor. Students keep laminated card with 26 letters with numbered arrow cues at their desk to refer to while engaging in other writing activities during the day. PAL Revised Talking Letters Teacher's Guide. The materials and procedures were developed in consultation with Richard Vineski and in pilot work and have been used in multiple research studies. A laminated talking letters card is kept at students' desk and used during instruction to facilitate using it at near point and avoiding student having to view it at far point on distant wall. Consonants are on one side, vowels on the other side. Consonants are organized by one-letter graphemes, B, as in balloons, two-letter graphemes, blend composed of sounds that go with each of single letters in the blend, as in BL, bl, in block, or diphthong that goes with a unique sound not related to either single letter, as in SH, sh, in shoe, and TH, the, as in thumb, or two letters, one of which is silent, as in WR, r, in wrench, or KN, n, as in knife, and three-letter grapheme, two of letters are silent, and you hear one of them, DGE, j, as in bridge. Vowels are organized by syllable types. Closed syllable ends in consonant, a, as in apple. Open syllable ends in vowel, a, as in apron. Vowel team, diphthong, in which neither letter corresponds to sound typically associated with it, but rather the two letters in the grapheme correspond to a unique sound, oy, oi, as in boy, or digraph, in which one of two letters in the grapheme corresponds to sound associated with one of the letters, oa, o, as in boat. R-controlled vowel, vowel plus letter R, AR, R, as in star. L-controlled vowel, vowel plus L, EL, L, as in elephant. Silent E, vowel followed by consonant neighbor, followed by silent E, A, P, silent E, as in ape. And schwa, unaccented vowel, as in above. For both consonants and vowels, alternations, alternative sounds that go with the same grapheme in the reading direction are side by side on the talking letters card and are referred to as nicknames. We tell children, just like some children may be named Susan, but also called Sue and Susie. They have nicknames. We're very fortunate in English that the same letter or letter groups can have different sounds that go with it. Alphabetic principle is taught in the reading direction in reading lessons and in the spelling direction in writing lessons. Grapheme to phoneme correspondences in the reading direction are not necessarily the same as phoneme grapheme correspondences in the spelling direction. For example, in reading direction, the grapheme A can correspond to phoneme A in a closed syllable, or phoneme A in an open syllable, or schwa sound in an unaccented syllable, ah. But the heard spoken phoneme A, long A sound, in spelling direction can be spelled EY as in they, AY as in say, AI as in paid, EIGH as in way, A as in table, open syllable ending in vowel, or A as in ape, A followed by consonant followed by silent E. In reading direction, teacher takes a turn and points to and touches the single or multi-letter grapheme under a picture, then names the pictured word, and then makes the target sound in the pictured word. No dot equals beginning of word, one dot equals middle of word, two dots equals end of word. Then student takes a turn and imitates what the teacher did. Lessons specify which consonants and vowels to practice this way in a given lesson. In the spelling direction, the teacher doesn't start by pointing to the letters, but rather the teacher takes a turn and names the pictured word, then makes the target sound in the pictured word, and then points to and touches the single or multi-letter grapheme under the picture. Then the student takes a turn and imitates what the teacher did. Lessons specify which consonants and vowels to practice this way. Alternations in the spelling direction are called substitutes. Just like the coach may substitute one player for another, so the first player doesn't get too tired, we tell the children we're very fortunate in English that we can substitute different spellings, single letters, letter groups, for the same sound, so that one letter or letter group does not get too tired. The goal is to create automatic correspondences and then to apply them strategically to reading and spelling words. And the lessons indicate which lists to use in the reproducibles for the words to practice for either applying strategies to reading words or applying strategies to spelling words. Now I will talk about the PAL Revised Research-Based Reading and Writing Lessons. All the lesson sets are organized by levels of language, a concept validated in psycholinguistic research at the time our research began, that has recently been validated in brain imaging research. Teaching to multiple levels of language close in time creates functional connections across levels of language in a functional reading system and a functional writing system. Many lessons have morphological awareness activities developed in collaboration with William Nagy for specific research studies, as well as phonological and orthographic awareness activities, because English is a morphophonemic orthography. Okay, and for each of the lessons, it indicates what the published research study is that the lesson set is based on. The lessons were designed to be used at a particular grade or grade levels, and the lesson sets can be used with students at those grade levels or older students whose reading or spelling level is at that grade level. Okay, many activities in the revised reading and writing lessons draw on the other three revised instructional products as well as the reproducible instructional materials. The abbreviated titles for each of these used in the slides that follow are bolded here. Okay, I will now scroll through each of these lesson sets. And on the first slide, you will see the levels of language that are taught. On the second slide, you will see progress monitoring that can be used for comparing how the student was achieving before the intervention and after the intervention. This includes growth graphs for individual lessons and also for pre-instruction and post-instruction comparison based on curriculum-based, criterion reference, normed reference, and sometimes portfolio-based assessments, and provides the citation for the research study on which the lesson set is based. For each lesson set, I will read whether it has been translated from published research on at-risk readers or at-risk writers or students with diagnosed reading or writing disabilities, and the grade level or levels of the research participants. And what I mean by the levels, the first level, subword level, might use talking letter cards to teach alphabetic principle in the reading direction or in the spelling direction, or might teach handwriting. That's subword. At the word level, those strategies are applied to reading words or reading or spelling words. And at the text level, there could be oral reading of words, reading comprehension activities for text, or written composition to generate and compose texts. So let's look. Lesson set 1 is for at-risk beginning readers, grade 1. Lesson set 2 is for at-risk beginning readers, grade 2. Lesson set 3 is for at-risk beginning handwriters, grade 1. Lesson set 4 is for at-risk beginning spellers, grade 2. Lesson set 5 is for at-risk beginning spellers, grade 3. Lesson set 6 is for at-risk readers, grade 2. Lesson set 7 is for at-risk writers, grade 3. Lesson set 8 is for at-risk writers in the summer between grades 3 and 4. Lesson set 9 is for at-risk readers, grade 2, in before or after school reading clubs. Lesson set 10 is for at-risk writers in grade 4 in before or after school writing clubs. Lesson set 11 is for diagnosed reading disability, grades 2 to 6. Lesson set 12 is for diagnosed reading disabilities, grades 4 to 7. Lesson set 13 is for diagnosed reading and/or writing disabilities because many assignments at school require integration of reading and writing, and that is taught, grades 3 to 7. Lesson set 14 is for diagnosed writing disabilities, grades 3 to 7. Lesson set 15 is for diagnosed dyslexia. In addition to the reading activities at subword, word, and text level, children engaged in a 1-hour science workshop, which kept them intellectually engaged. But they also learned the hope story of Einstein, who struggled greatly at the beginning of his schooling, but went on to make important contributions to the world. So they learned just because you struggle at the beginning doesn't mean that you can't go on and be successful. These hope themes we've used in a lot of our interventions and found them to be very important. There is also guidance for helping professionals design their own instructional plan. Now, I hope after the webinar, you can take time to read the content on the prior slides a bit more carefully than I had time in going through them. And these were all shown in research to be effective. 9 of the first 10 lesson sets were based on studies conducted in multi-site school settings. The last 5 lesson sets and 1 of the first 10 lesson sets were conducted at the university in the Learning Disabilities Research Center. Now we're going to transition to the revised user guide for PAL 2 reading and writing, PAL 2 RW. Part 1 describes or explains the Tier 1 screen intervene for prevention of reading and writing problems. Tier 2 is problem-solving consultation, and Tier 3 is differential diagnosis linked to differentiated instruction. A separate test administration manual explains procedures for administering and scoring subtests for the PAL 2 reading writing. The user guide is very much focused on intervention. At Tier 1, all children at a grade level are screened to identify those who are at risk below the lower limit of average range, minus 2/3 standard deviation, scaled score of 8 for grade. Those who are at risk participate in the intervene yoke to the screen. Skills assessed by PAL 2 RW subtest are described in parentheses after the name of the subtest. The same PAL 2 reading writing screen measures may be used across grade levels, but the yoked intervene may differ depending on grade level. As I scroll through slides for Tier 1, note that many of the intervenes use lesson sets from the revised reading and writing lessons discussed earlier in this webinar. Also note the other screening highlighted in red on slide 15. It is critical to identify students in kindergarten who are struggling with using and learning oral language by ear and by mouth through screening with tests, but also by examining reported language development history in the parent questionnaire that I will talk about more later, and refer those students who've had delays in speech and language to the speech and language specialist for comprehensive assessment and relevant intervention. Okay, now I'm going to screen through these in kindergarten. That's what you screen for. First grade, screening for reading, writing, and related processes. Second grade, third grade, fourth grade. And we found that doing this, most of the kids got up to within the average range or better. Okay, Tier 2 multidisciplinary team MDT problem-solving consultation begins by reaching out to all parents by sending home a parent questionnaire at the beginning of the school year and scheduling parent interviews if parent expressed concerns. During the school year, encouraging teachers to complete and submit to the MDT referral forms for students who are struggling with reading and/or writing, and after teacher referral forms are received, conducting teacher interviews and classroom observations. Parent questionnaires, teacher referral forms, teacher interview questions, and classroom observation resources are provided in Part 2 of the Revised User Guide for PAL2 RW. Based on information gathered from parents and/or teachers of students struggling with reading and/or writing, the MDT makes an assessment plan. After the assessment results are available, the problem is defined. Modification of the instructional program is planned. A progress monitoring plan is made, and response to the modified instructional program is evaluated. Resources are provided in the Revised User Guide for PAL2 RW for planning assessment, modifying instructional program, monitoring progress, and evaluating response to modified instructional program. Tier 3 is research-supported differential diagnosis and differentiated instruction linked to diagnosis for dysgraphia, dyslexia, and ALD, oral and written language learning disability. The first section of Tier 3 in the Revised User Guide for PAL2 RW begins with an overview of the research support for differential diagnosis and differentiated specialized instruction, and there's a wealth of research information. The second section of Tier 3 of the Revised User Guides for PAL2 RW provides detailed information on the procedures for diagnosis of dysgraphia, dyslexia, and ALD, including use of learning profiles for hallmark impairments and phenotype profiles for impaired processes related to those hallmark impairments. Lots of information for how to do the diagnosis. The third section of Tier 3 in the Revised User Guides for PAL2 RW discusses issues related to designing specialized instruction for each of the 3 language-based SLDs, dysgraphia, dyslexia, and ALD. So what is dysgraphia? Does research show how to define it? Yes, dysgraphia is a word of Greek origin. It means IA, condition of, DYS, impaired, graph, letter writing by hand, the condition of impaired letter writing by hand. Are all handwriting problems dysgraphia? No, there's other causes, and they require different treatments. Learning profile for dysgraphia: impaired legible and automatic alphabet letter writing and sustained handwriting, which in turn may interfere with learning to spell and compose. And then phenotype profile: impaired orthographic coding, storing letters in mind's eye, sequential finger planning and output, and/or orthographic loop from letter coding in mind's eye to sequential finger movements to produce letters. Also, executive functions for supervisory attention, focus, switch, sustain attention, and self-monitor may be impaired. So what is dyslexia? And does research show how to define it? Yes, dyslexia is also a word of Greek origin, meaning condition of, IA, impaired, DYS. Lex comes from word lexicon, which is a mental dictionary for word reading and spelling. Are all word reading and spelling problems dyslexia? No, there's other causes requiring different treatments. The learning profile for dyslexia: impaired accuracy and/or rate for oral word reading, decoding pseudo words and/or word identification of real words, silent real word reading, and spelling. Phenotype profile for dyslexia based on working memory components supporting word reading and spelling: impaired phonological coding, impaired orthographic coding, impaired phonological loop from the phonological code in the mind out the mouth, and/or orthographic loop from the orthographic code in the mind out the hand and fingers. Also, supervisory attention can be impaired, focus, switch, sustained attention, and self-monitoring. So what is ALLD? Well, some children struggle in learning language in the preschool years, delayed in first words, word combinations, and then combining even more words in syntactic structures. And then during the school years, they struggle in listening to and understanding teachers' instructional talk, reading comprehension of written language and instructional materials, and using oral language and written language to express themselves. That is, they have difficulty learning language and using language to learn. Are all language learning problems ALLD? No, there's other causes, developmental disabilities outside the normal range, severe articulation problems, severe hearing problems, and that would require other treatments. The learning profile for ALLD: impaired listening comprehension, oral expression, reading comprehension, and/or written expression composition. The phenotype profile: impaired syntactic coding and often morphological coding in each of or some of the four language systems by ear, mouth, eye, and hand, with or without word finding problems, and they can also have trouble with supervisory attention and self-monitoring. Now, why is specialized instruction tailored to diagnose language-based SLD needed? Well, research has identified genetic and brain bases of dysgraphia, dyslexia, and ALLD that differ from each other and from typical readers and writers. And we also found in research that unless the intervention was tailored to the nature of the diagnosis, the children did not respond. These are some resources based on research for specialized instruction for dysgraphia, dyslexia, ALLD, and hope themes are important, and they're built into all the units or workshops in the Berninger and Wolf 2009 resource. Transition to revised user guide for PAL2 Math, PAL2M. PAL2M covers assessment instruction links for Tier 1 screen intervene, Tier 2 problem-solving consultation, and Tier 3 differential diagnosis differentiated instruction. A separate test administration manual explains procedures for administering and scoring subtests for the PAL2M. At Tier 1, all children at a grade level are screened on specific PAL2M subtests to identify those who are at risk below the lower limit of average range, minus 2/3 standard deviation, scaled score of 8 for grade on each screen. Those who are at risk participate in the intervene for specific grade levels. If a student is at risk in PAL2M numeral writing in kindergarten, grades 1, 2, 3, or 4, the revised PAL handwriting lessons can be adapted for learning to write numerals legibly and automatically. Now I will scroll through Tier 1 screen intervene for math, kindergarten through grade 4, before commenting on the other intervenes. Okay, Tier 1 kindergarten, Tier 1 first grade, Tier 1 second grade, Tier 1 third grade, Tier 1 fourth grade, Even if the same PAL-2M subtest is given across grade levels for math, the intervene may differ depending on the grade level of the student at risk on the subtest. If a student is at risk in PAL-2M oral counting, the intervene differs across grades from counting to develop one-to-one correspondence between numeral names and quantity in kindergarten to counting along a number line taped to a desk with visual and somatosensory feedback and counting with eyes closed to develop a mental number line grades 1 to 4 with increments for counting in the forward and backward directions of increasing size across the grades. If a student is at risk in PAL-2M math fact retrieval, addition, and subtraction in grades 1 or 2, the intervene is practicing the math facts with mixed input and output modes. Look right, listen right, look say, listen say. If a student is at risk in PAL-2 math fact retrieval, multiplication and division in grades 3 or 4, the intervene is practicing the math facts with the same mixed input-output modes. If the student is at risk in PAL-2M computation operations, the intervene is to do addition and subtraction without regrouping grade 1 or with regrouping grade 2, or multiplication and division without regrouping grade 3 or with regrouping grade 4. At all grade levels, the student learns to copy a problem presented horizontally into vertical format, one numeral per square, lined up in rows and columns. They also learn to navigate through space and time during math calculations. Unlike reading words from left to right, we read numbers right to left and begin addition, subtraction, and multiplication on right, but division on left, and may have to navigate up and down and up and diagonally. If a student is at risk in PAL-2M math problem solving, the intervene to identify the operation needed to solve the problem is based on 2 math problems in each lesson selected from the math textbook for the student's grade level 1, 2, 3, or 4. If the student is at risk in PAL-2M place value, a device with wires and beads on wires is used to teach the concept and written symbols for ones, tens, and hundreds place in grade 2, 1, tens, hundreds, and thousands place in grade 3, and ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s in grade 4. If the student is at risk in PAL-2M part-whole relationships, the intervene explains denominators and numerators and the concept that the larger the denominator, the smaller each part is, grade 3, and conversion of unlike denominators to like denominators so that fractions can be added, subtracted, multiplied, and divided, grade 4. Tier 2 problem solving consultation in the Revised User Guide for PAL-2 Math is comparable to that in Tier 2 problem solving consultation in the Revised User Guide for PAL-2 Reading and Writing, except that the focus is on arithmetic skills rather than on reading and writing skills. Parent questionnaires are sent home at the beginning of each school year to create positive homeschool relationships. We welcome input from parents and want to know how we can help your child this year. Teachers are encouraged to complete and submit to the MDT the teacher referral form for any student struggling in math. When a teacher referral form is submitted, members of the MDT interview the teacher. Which math skills are being taught? With which math skills does the student struggle? And do a classroom observation. Based on parent and teacher concerns and data gathered by the MDT, an assessment plan is made. Based on assessment results and other information gathered, the MDT works with general education teacher to create an intervention plan to modify instructional program in place, creates a progress monitoring plan, and evaluates whether the modified instructional plan was effective or further modifications are needed. Throughout the process, the MDT considers whether issues related to language by ear, language by mouth, language by eye, and/or language by hand may be affecting math learning. Part 2 of the Revised User Guide for PAL-2M has many resources for Tier 2. The first section of Tier 3 outlines the procedures for diagnosing dyscalculia based on learning profile, hallmark impairments, and phenotype profile, processes related to hallmark impairments, and other information gathered from parents and teachers. The second section of Tier 3 describes procedures for linking assessment findings to specialized instruction for dyscalculia, or for dyscalculia that has co-occurring dysgraphia, or co-occurring dyslexia, or co-occurring LLD. So what is dyscalculia? As in algebra, begin by defining variables. Dis equals impaired. Calcul is derived from calculation. IA is condition of. Dyscalculia is condition of impaired calculation. Has research shown dyscalculia, a specific learning disability, exists? Yes, children who are overall within or above the normal range in cognition, low average to very superior, may be impaired in math calculation, learning and retrieving math facts, and performing computational procedures. Are all math difficulties dyscalculia? No, there are other causes needing different treatments. Do some children with dyscalculia have strengths in math reasoning, such as spatial reasoning and problem solving, that do not require arithmetic calculations? Yes, some children may be twice exceptional, gifted in many aspects of math and intellectual abilities, but learning disabled in arithmetic computations. This is an example of specialized instruction for dyscalculia used in our Learning Disability Center. ERDOS, mathematicians constructing, conversing, and writing, E equals MC squared, but we added W for writing. A club for math lovers. Students learned about the Hungarian mathematician Erdos, who loved numbers and traveled around the world to solve math problems with other mathematicians. So the students worked with a math buddy and were encouraged to look for patterns in number lines and even write their own equations. To create a functional math system, they completed a warm-up writing activity for the first 26 numerals in counting order, a counting activity along a mental number line in forward or backward direction, followed by writing sum or difference or product or quotient. They also counted along a taped number line in forward or backward direction, followed by writing sum or difference or product or quotient. They also learned how writing multi-place numbers proceeds writing to right to left, in contrast to reading words, which proceeds left to right, and how to navigate through space and time during different kinds of calculations, right to left, top down, bottom up, and diagonally. They also created addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division problems they exchanged with math buddies and solved. Examples of how language by ear, listening, language by mouth, speaking, language by eye, reading, and language by hand, writing are involved in learning math are provided on this slide. Don't forget to assess whether a student diagnosed with dyscalculia might also have co-occurring dysgraphia, dyslexia, or LLD, and if the student does, provide math instruction that takes into account the co-occurring language-based specific learning disability. Transition to post-virtual education era. Instead of panicking and expressing gloom and doom, do the following. Now that many students did not learn well during the pandemic when they did not receive in-person instruction in a school setting, now that in-person education has resumed in school settings, there are still ways we can help students to learn and continue on their educational journeys so that their achievement in reading, writing, and math will increase. And we can do Tier 1 screen intervene for reading, writing, and math skills if they're below the lower limits of the average range, and intervene until they get in the average range or grade level. Tier 2 multidisciplinary problem solving consultation for individuals who struggle with reading, writing, and/or math to develop customized instructional program. And Tier 3 diagnostic assessment for dysgraphia, dyslexia, LD and/or dyscalculia, and then link that to appropriate evidence-based specialized instruction tailored to the documented diagnosis or diagnoses. Now, the goal of the webinar was to call your attention to the many assessment and instructional resources and research references in the revised instructional products and revised user guides for PAL 2 reading, writing, and PAL 2 math. I hope you can review the content of the PowerPoint in the handout that I did not have time to discuss in detail, and you learned how you can get access to that handout. The revised instructional products and revised user guides have additional information about use of not only PAL instructional tools and tests, but other instructional tools and tests as well, many of which we used in our own research. So now we're going to transition to ordering PAL products, cited assessment and instructional tools, and cited research. This is how to order PAL products if you're interested, the citations. And now I'm going to turn this over to Tina Eichstadt, who will moderate the question and answer session. And I thank you for attending. Tina?
Thank you, Dr. Berninger, and welcome to everyone. What a wealth of content that you shared with us today. I know this represents decades of research from your career, and so we thank you for sharing some of that today in the context of these revised intervention materials. As people are thinking of questions and dropping those in the Q&A, I do have a couple to start out with because we have about 10 minutes of time, which is perfect. So let me ask you the first question, Dr. Berninger. So you have not only the research experience, which you shared with us throughout all of your presentation today, but you also have implementation experience from your work at the university and into the local schools in your area. What can you provide attendees today in terms of wisdom about overcoming barriers to implementing some of these things in the schools, and any tips and or tricks that you may have that may benefit those listening?
Wow, that's a good question. It probably would take me more than 10 minutes to thoroughly answer that, but I think you need to approach it with an open mind that, yes, we have great challenges in the schools, but if we approach it with an open mind and we work together as a multidisciplinary team, we can do it. I saw this over and over again when I trained school psychologists, and we would do practica at the university and bring schools, parents, children to the clinics, and also when I supervised interns that were out there in the schools. And wanting to make a difference and willing to put extra work and time into doing it to get it started really reaped benefits. And I think I was sharing with some of you an experience where a school psychologist really took this to town to do the 3 tiers of intervention. And by focusing on tier 1, screen, intervene, and a lot of problem solving consultation, they just were not getting referrals for special ed by grade 3. So it can be rewarding. And I think the other thing is reach out to the parents, send home those questionnaires. How can we help your kid? Every year at the beginning of the school year, do that and let them know you want to hear from them how they think you can help their child. And it makes much better positive homeschool working relationships. And that's so important.
Really appreciate that. You know, some of the sort of the daunting nature of doing implementation is just, how do I get started? And so I think the tips that you provide here with a couple of those insights, and then the encouragement to, you know, don't be afraid, just start, are great words to the wise from you. I have a couple questions that have popped in as you were answering this last one. The first one is, how would you address large grade level gaps with students with special education needs who have IEPs and 504s in 7th grade math? So zooming in on 7th grade math, but these large gaps for students with IEPs and 504s. Any advice?
Okay, so 7th grade, they're in middle school. And in many schools that I'm familiar with, math would be a course. The children rotate during the day to different classes for different areas of the curriculum. So there would be a time during the day when they would go to math. And if all of the children, you can also screen at 7th grade. You don't have to screen just kindergarten to grade 4. And know what the instructional levels in math are for the students who are assigned to the math section at a particular time of the day. Now, in some schools, they might have students who are at similar instructional levels in math taking the math class at the same time. Other schools, there might be that range at that time. And the best advice I have is to use the wisdom that came from Robert Slavin, who did meta-analyses and found that children learn better when they're taught at their instructional level. So even if they're, I think you said 7th grade, and if they're behind, they might be at a 3rd or 4th grade level in math. If you can form instructional groups and you teach them at the instructional level where they are, then they're more likely to make progress that year, to move up their zone of proximal development, it's sometimes called. So I definitely would screen to find out what those instructional levels are, and then try to organize so you have students who maybe 3rd, 4th grade level together, maybe 5th, 6th grade level together, and so on. So you can aim instruction where you should at that particular grade level. And to not be discouraged. Some students can be pretty behind, but when taught at their instructional level and using some evidence-based practices, they can actually make impressive gains.
That's great. Thank you. And similar to that, any other extensions you would make for ELL students in 9th grade biology? So I'm not sure if this attendee is talking about just in the biology classroom, but now we're talking about high school students who are ELLs.
Yeah, let me be, I have to be frank and honest. We did not do research, in my experience isn't teaching 9th grade biology. That said, in many of our interventions and assessment studies related to reading and writing, we were in schools with ESL students. And one of the things that I learned, and I learned from my graduate students who were, their first language was Spanish. And they pointed out that children who could have phonological awareness training in their first language, Spanish, in addition to phonological awareness training in English, did better. And they actually designed studies to show that and published them in peer-reviewed journals. And so there are times when it's important to provide some instruction in first language as well as the second language in terms of literacy learning. The other thing, some of our studies were done in schools that, in one school they had Spanish-speaking children. They also had Chinese-speaking children who had immigrated. And the ESL students could learn too with the same principles. They just needed to be screened to know where they were, what they were struggling with, and then provide the interventions. And there's other languages that are being spoken in our schools. So we need to be cognizant of what the child's first language is, and then bring in parents, others from the community, whatever we can to facilitate that, but also evidence-based instruction in English, because they're also English language learners. And there are a lot of resources out there now for teaching ESL. And I would recommend that they read some of those resources and also there's a lot of expertise in the community now to reach out to people in the community for help.
That's great. Thank you. We have time for at least one more question. Here's a little different one for you, Dr. Berninger. How are the differences between left-handed versus right-handed writing needs addressed in the PAL learning model?
Okay. When we did our research, we of course had the children use their dominant hand, which they should have a dominant hand by first grade. And that's when we, that was the grade level we used when we did the research on which those lessons are based. So we certainly noted if a child had not established dominance, and one of the first things we did is we worked with them to make sure they would get a dominant hand. And then they were taught the lesson, same steps, they did it the same, using their dominant hand, whether it was right hand or left hand. We were also mindful that how paper is held and how the pencil is held has to be monitored to make sure they had a good pencil grip for the hand that was their dominant hand, and how they were positioning their arm and hand on the paper. So we did, we monitored that and we tried to intervene for that. If a child absolutely could not establish dominance at first grade, then that was reason for a referral to both a physician and a physical therapist to explore more why by age 6 the child was having trouble establishing dominance. That didn't happen often, but it can happen. And that's because you need a dominant hand because the signal goes to the opposite side of the brain, and the myelination of the fibers that connect the right and left aren't fully myelinated in, say, grade 1, age 6, when a child's learning handwriting, and often do not become fully myelinated until late elementary school or transition to middle school, early adolescence. And that becomes a problem, not for handwriting, but for teaching touch typing, where you have to use both hands and you look at the screen, not at the computer. And we did a lot of research showing that that's important to start teaching that around grade 4, but it might take some of them to grade 5 or 6 to do that. And it's much better if you don't teach the touch typing, the kids hunt and peck and they do well with the computers. So we need to be mindful not only of dominant hand for handwriting early on, but then to teach the touch typing where you have to use both hands. And that's another issue to monitor.
That's great. Thank you for that thorough feedback. There are a couple more questions in the Q&A, and I apologize, we're out of time. So what Dr. Berninger has graciously agreed to do is to have me send her those questions and she'll answer them in writing. So stay tuned for that, and we'll get back to you on your questions that we don't have time for in the time we have today. So I want to thank Dr. Berninger very highly for her wonderful time with us today and her wealth of expertise and knowledge. And we thank you for joining us, and take care. Have a great day.